In 1054, the Catholic Church underwent a dramatic split due to a series of political and theological controversies over the preceding centuries. This split, known as the Schism of 1054, resulted in a tragic and drastic loss of the political influence the institution of the Church had previously had. The flurry of controversies, the dispute over whether or not to leaven the communion bread, for example, were so seemingly tiny and meaningless that it is a wonder in today's world why the Church and Christianity in Europe were so divided as a result. Immediately after the schism, more violence struck, as the tragedy of the failed Crusades roiled the Church even further. Later on, the Church would triumph over the violence, with multiple attempts to reach out, as well as the reforms brought on by the Second Vatican Council. In addition, the consolidation of power in the East was so drastic that it turned Russia, Turkey, and Greece into unprecedented political powerhouses. This is the story of the ultimate split, the Great Schism of 1054.
Afterward, I will restore the fallen house of David. I will rebuild its ruins and restore it.
In 54 AD, there was a meeting of the Christian apostles, the 12 as written about in the Gospels. After the death of Jesus, they had all gone their separate ways into different cities, ranging from Antioch to Constantinople. They gathered in Jerusalem, the well-known Holy City, to debate what was known as the Judaizer heresy. A group known as the Judaizers were propagating the idea that, in order to convert to the religion of Christianity, it was an absolute must that you were to be Jewish. This had been strung up by the demand from Christians in Jerusalem that Gentiles in Antioch circumcise their men. Eventually, under the influence of Peter, the council resolved that you did not have to be a Jew to then convert to Christianity. 12 years later, Peter would die, along with Paul in Rome. Several years passed. Three main cities came to prominence in the wake of the death of Peter, these being Jerusalem, Rome, and Antioch. These cities quickly became the main powers in the western parts of the Catholic Church. They were known as the Petrine Sees. Years passed. Martyrs came and went. Emperors died. But by the birth of Justin Martyr around 100 AD, the Christian faith was spreading. The 200 years would bring trials, but also the theology of the Christian faith. Amidst all of this, a new heresy known as Arianism rose to prominence in Alexandria and spread around Europe. This heresy taught that Christ was not divine, but rather a creation of God that had been especially prophetic. A council was gathered in Nicaea in 325 AD, in what is now modern-day Turkey. This council was called by an unbaptized catechumen, who also happened to be the emperor, Constantine I. The council in Nicaea, held by all of the bishops within the church, resolved that the truth of the Trinity within Christian teaching was absolute, and proceeded to both excommunicate and exile Arius, the founder of the heresy of Arianism, from the church, as well as Alexandria. Once all this had been resolved, the council proceeded to conceive of the Nicene Creed, which at the time became the central document of Christian belief, alongside the Bible and Catechism of the Catholic Church. By the Council of Constantinople in 381, the creed that we say today at Mass was finalized. It was also here that two major sees rose to prominence. In the West, Rome, the bishop being named Patriarch of the West, and to the east, Constantinople, with Constantinople's patriarch ruling subsequently over all the East. Now we arrive at 1054. In addition to these listed controversies, there were growing doctrinal differences among the East and West, dozens and dozens in count. We will go into detail on the three biggest disputes that arose. Firstly,
in the words of Christ in the invocation of the Holy Spirit, the bread and wine become Christ's body and blood.
Firstly, there was dispute over whether or not to leaven or rise the bread taken during communion. The West had instituted that unleavened bread was the main essential way to go about the Eucharist whilst taking communion. The Eastern section of the Church disagreed with this heavily, saying that since Jesus had risen from the dead and not stayed dead and gone, this meant that the bread that was him was to be risen respectively.
The deacon carried above his head the sacred pyx, in which is contained the sacrament under the appearance of bread. Then came the day of unleavened bread, on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed.
In addition, there was still controversy over the Trinity, and whether or not God was a single indispensable being, or three entities, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, that were interwoven beyond human understanding. The main controversy, however, was the rise of one Michael Cerularius.
And we ordain and decree that we shall have supremacy as well over the 4 chief seats of Antioch, Alexandria, Constantinople, and Jerusalem.
Michael Cerularius had been trained for the civil service rather than any sort of priesthood throughout his career. Despite this, he was elected to be the Patriarch of Constantinople in 1043. While Patriarch, Cerularius developed a greedy thirst for political power that led him to disrupt the alliance between Constantine and the Byzantine Empire. In addition, Cerularius had forced the churches in his region and in his diocese to use Greek instead of Latin, which was a direct slander to the western part of the church. This led to Cardinal Humbert, a powerful cardinal in the western parts of the church, to excommunicate Cerularius from all functions of the Catholic Church. The way that Cardinal Humbert went about this excommunication was extremely dramatic, so rumor has it. Rather than the orthodox method of holding a formal ceremony, it is said that Humbert marched into Cerularius' cathedral and slammed the papal bull firmly onto the altar before storming right back out.
Let him be anathema marantha. Nay, with the devil's angels, lest they repent. Amen.
Upon the death of Pope Leo IX in 1054, the church had had enough. They split into 2 factions, East and West. The West, having many of the powerful sees, most notably the See of Rome, naturally had the most power and remained the Catholic Church. The split itself was a mutual excommunication in which both sides declared the other to be utter heresy to the true nature of Christian doctrine.
The earliest church, which is described in the Acts of the Apostles, did not confine itself to the land of Judea.
In 1098, Pope Urban II gave a speech launching the First Crusade on the city of Jerusalem, which had fallen under Muslim control. There were multiple subsequent attempts to reclaim the Holy Land from the Muslims, as a result of an appeal from Byzantine Empire Alexios I Komnenos. This represented a twisted version of a rare glance at unity from the East and West over a conflict. During the 4th attempt at a crusade on Jerusalem, Constantinople was successfully sacked by the Church, as well as the Byzantines. The event is described with abject horror by a Muslim named Usama Mudik.
For even if my son were to be taken captive, his captivity could not bring him a worse misfortune than carrying him to the land of the Franks. He hastened with only 10 Gauls and arrived at Constantinople.
Mudik. Many centuries passed after these events. In 1968, the Second Vatican Council was held, where the humanity of the Catholic Church, as well as its teachings on education, were reaffirmed.
The Sacred Ecumenical Council has considered with care how extremely important education is in the life of man and how its influence ever grows in the social progress this age. All men of every race, condition, and age have an inalienable right to an education.
Were reaffirmed. The schism continues to reverberate today. The sects of the Orthodox Church have gained a significant amount of power in the East, most notably in their use as a propaganda tool in modern Russia. Additionally, the Catholic Church itself is no longer a political structure, but a sort of advisory council for the humanity of the world, and this was reaffirmed by the Second Vatican Council. The schism itself proved to be a triumph that resulted out of the initial tragedy of a split in 2.